If you've stopped by the romance section or the book talk table at a bookstore anytime in the last couple of years, and you also happen to be a fan of, or at least aware of, the Star Wars sequel trilogy, you may have noticed some familiar faces. A big, broad man with black hair, sometimes even facial moles, and a petite, 5'8" woman with her hair in a bun and a slightly irritated look on her face. That's right, hand me my red string and my pushpins. I think Reylos might just be taking over the publishing industry, and to prove it, I read every single Reylo novel. Let's talk about it. In 2015, Star Wars Episode 7 The Force Awakens debuted on the big screen. Production on the film started shortly after Disney acquired Lucasfilm, the company responsible for every Star Wars movie prior. The Force Awakens effectively had two protagonists, a defecting stormtrooper who picks up the name Finn, and a scrappy young scavenger named Rey. Finn and Rey band together to attempt to deliver an important map to the good guys, the Resistance, and to keep it out of the hands of the bad guys, the First Order. The main antagonist of the movie is one of those bad guys, a masked figure referred to as Kylo Ren. Over the course of the film, we, the audience, learn a few important things about Kylo Ren. Here are the big ones. First, that his dad is Han Solo. Hey, that's the guy from the other movies. Second, that he's got kind of a pretty face. Third, that his birth name is Ben Solo. And fourth, that he's lonely and conflicted and a special boy who is being corrupted by the bad guys. We also learn a couple things about Rey. First, that she doesn't know who her parents are. Second, that she can use the Force. Third, that she's pretty good with a lightsaber and a hitting stick, and she can hold her own against this Kylo Ren guy. And fourth, that she's a spunky young woman who had a hard childhood, and is afraid that she's unlovable but wants desperately to be known. The other protagonist, Finn, is introduced to us as FN-2187. He starts the film as a stormtrooper with the First Order but defects, freeing the pilot Poe, who in return gives him the name Finn. Finn repeatedly runs up against the limits of his own courage in this movie. He clearly feels an internal drive to do good and easily comes to care for those around him, but he doesn't necessarily have the self-confidence to stop him from being afraid. He almost flees several times in this film, and yet his character is really revealed because he makes the decision, over and over, to do the right thing even when it's scary. Sorry, the fandom I'm about to talk about doesn't super care about Finn, so what I meant to say was, he's Rey's new bestie. Beyond just serving as the beginning of a new era for the Star Wars franchise, or even for Disney's capitalist hellscape, the release of The Force Awakens marked the beginning of a new era for Star Wars fandom. There was suddenly a whole new generation of young, attractive characters that fans could ship with each other. In the period immediately after the release of The Force Awakens, fandom seized onto the character of Kylo Ren, this brooding, tragic, slightly tantrumy character. They found particularly fertile soil in shipping him, and this resulted in the creation of what was for a time the fastest growing and most popular ship in the Star Wars fandom, Kylo Ren x Armitage Hux. Now, you might be wondering, who the fuck is that guy? He's another pointy white dude from the movie, sort of a side character at most. He's a general for the First Order. Him and Kylo Ren, they do not like each other. No, they do not. In the first 6 months after the movie's release, about 3,500 fanfictions were posted to the website Archive of Our Own, tagged with the relationship between these two characters. The second most popular ship is between Finn and Poe, that dashing pilot who gave Finn his name and also let Finn keep his jacket and then bit his lip at him. In the first 6 months post The Force Awakens, about 2,700 works tagged with this pairing were posted on Archive of Our Own, or AO3, a non-profit-run fanfiction hosting website. And then, in third place, a real underdog of a ship, especially in a very male-male pairing-driven fandom landscape, was the relationship between Kylo Ren, who fans of this pairing largely prefer to refer to as Ben Solo, and Rey. This pairing, which seemingly immediately went by the ship name Reylo, racked up about 1,800 works in the first 6 months after the release of The Force Awakens. From the beginning, the fandom generated by The Force Awakens was riddled with infighting, particularly on the subject of ships. By the way, ships are romantic or sexual relationships between characters. For a huge portion of the fandom, Reylo was a subject of particular ire. One day after the release of The Force Awakens, a fan fiction was posted to AO3, which to this day remains the most viewed and kudos or liked fan fiction in the Reylo tag on Archive of Our Own. It's titled A Reylo Fic by author Treasy, and the text of the fic is as follows.
Rey picks up Kylo and dunks him into the garbage. Fucking obliterated.
The author has also included a comment which reads,
Rey is a lesbian and this shit fucking sucks.
This was not by any means an unpopular opinion in the growing fandom spawned by The Force Awakens. Rey being a lesbian was something that at this time just existed in the abstract, in the consciousness of the fandom. Rey doesn't interact with a single female character anywhere near her age in The Force Awakens, but people really did not like the ship between her and Kylo Ren. Accepting the idea that Rey was a lesbian, there were two main sources of pushback against this pairing. One was the incest concern, which, frankly, fans of Star Wars are justified in being worried about. There was a popular fan theory after the film's release that Rey was secretly Luke Skywalker's child. This seemed to spawn out of the unknown status of her parentage and the fact that secret blood connections are an all-time favorite gimmick of Star Wars. If this was true, Rey and Ben Solo would be cousins. Gross. The second major source of backlash against the ship is a little harder to pin down. For lack of a better word, I'm going to call it the abuse concern. When asked why they didn't like Reylo, back in January of 2016, about a month after the movie's release, one Tumblr user put it like this.
Rey and Kylo's interactions with each other are awful and abusive from the start. He kidnaps her, tortures her, forces his way into her mind, injures her, and generally shows no real regard for her physical and mental well-being other than, I really don't want to kill you. Come be my apprentice instead. Rey shows absolutely no attraction towards Kylo, seems to fear and pity him actually, and generally just has no positive feelings towards Kylo whatsoever. I saw no positive interactions between those two at all during the course of the movie. Basically, the ship itself as it stands based on canon interactions is an unhealthy, abusive ship that has no real basis in canon reality.
This user's opinion wasn't an outlier here. This was a fairly common take in the Star Wars fandom at the time and would progress for years going forward. And, I can't say this person is wrong in describing the on-screen interactions between Rey and Kylo Ren, because Rey is the hero of the movie and Kylo Ren is the villain. But some fans went even further, saying that those who shipped Reylo were actively condoning abuse in the real world.
Ugh. Some people are supporting Reylo and not saying it's abusive, and it shouldn't matter because it's fiction, and Please. Y'all, this isn't fun enemies to lovers. This is full-on massive mental and physical abuse that you're romanticizing. Hashtag trigger warning abuse. Hashtag I fucking hate Reylo. Hashtag weird ass straights condoning abusive relationships.
Reylo and Colleen Hoover and other such MF dark romances that romanticize, justify, and even condone abuse, misogyny, and patriarchal violence are all part of the massive, red pill, incel, alt-right conservative swing we're in right now. 100% a part of it. I'm not going to add nuance to this because at the moment I'm too lazy.
Fuck off. Reylo is abusive. Period. No way around it. If you ship that shit, you're condoning abuse, kidnapping, mental invasion, lying, everything that makes abuse abuse. Go fuck yourself. Get the fuck away from Star Wars.
The thing I found odd about this attitude at the time, and honestly still find odd, beyond a very heavy-handed use of the word abuse, is that it sort of acts like Reylo shippers were the first people to ever think the hero and the villain in a story should kiss each other. One needs to look no further than the Archive of Our Own top ships of the time to see that this was not the case. Just look at the number 9 ship for both 2015 and 2016. Draco Malfoy and Harry Potter hate each other, but of course, that's also why people want them to kiss each other. I was not a Reylo shipper in 2016. Frankly, I don't know if I can say I am now. Personally, I found the relationship between Finn and Poe to be much more compelling. But I want to say near the beginning of this video that I think this idea that Reylo shippers condone abuse is absurd. You still find people saying this even now. Depending on how this video does, you might even see them in my comments section. This was a really strange time in fandom culture in general and in Star Wars fandom in particular. People were acting up in all kinds of ways, and media literacy was down the drain. For reference, 2016 was also the year that Voltron Legendary Defender premiered, which was such a garbage fire of a fan community that it really deserves its own video. In Star Wars fandom at the time, especially on platforms like Tumblr, it was a common theory that Kylo Ren was completely evil, irredeemable, and beyond that the next two movies would not even attempt to redeem him. I don't want to just blame this on poor media literacy, though. I think some of this rhetoric also served as a legitimate response to the political climate of the time. It was 2015, the 2016 election fast approaching, and viewers saw in Kylo Ren an echo of white supremacists and neo-Nazis who were quickly and terrifyingly gaining political and social power and edging into the mainstream. Like the Empire in the original Star Wars trilogy, the First Order takes a lot of imagery from Nazi Germany and other fascistic movements, and so seeing this imagery in a movie that came out in a time where people on the news were also regurgitating Nazi imagery struck a chord to some audiences. But the truth is that The Force Awakens had been in production since the year of Obama's re-election, and while these similarities may have been timely, I don't think J.J. Abrams or the writers of the film intended Kylo Ren to be a parallel to any specific neo-Nazi or white supremacist who went on Breitbart. Disney didn't make this movie as sharp political commentary. They made it because they bought Star Wars and they wanted it to start making money. Watching The Force Awakens back now, the idea that Kylo Ren was never going to be redeemed feels ridiculous. They cast Adam Driver, a pretty conventionally attractive man, as Kylo Ren, and if you've watched other Star Wars movies, and watching this one, it's clear enough that being attractive in a Star Wars movie is a pretty good sign that you're at your core a good guy. In the visual language of the live-action Star Wars films, beauty is directly correlated with goodness. You need look no further than the freshly redeemed Anakin Skywalker's Force Ghost in the remastered versions of the original trilogy. He died ugly but good, and so he gets to hang around in the afterlife with the Force and be pretty. Just to be so clear, I think that's messed up. That's a bad moral message to be sending, but I also think it is the visual language that the Star Wars movies use. So Kylo Ren can kill his dad and order the slaughter of a whole town all he wants. The audience still ought to know that this face is gonna get redeemed. Just look at him. You think this guy's gonna die evil? So, after The Force Awakens was released in 2015, the controversial Reylo began to accumulate a small and rather resilient group of champions. But compared to other ships in the growing fandom, it was a less popular pick. Then, everything changed when The Last Jedi attacked. In 2017, Star Wars Episode 8, The Last Jedi, directed by Rian Johnson, debuted to eager audiences around the world. This film sets up 3 big plot threads, one for each of the trilogy's heroes. Poe, who continues to be kind of a secondary protagonist, has to learn self-control and quit being such a hotshot pilot. Finn gets a big metaphor plot about liberating others from an oppressive class, the way he was liberated from the stormtroopers, and a new female love interest in the form of Rose. And Rey learns how to be a Jedi from Luke Skywalker. Hey, that's the guy from the other movies. Let's make like Reylo shippers here and ignore entirely what Finn and Poe have going on. Rey's plot is the one we're interested in here because in it something really interesting happens. Something that launched Reylo as we know it today. Rey starts off the film by approaching Luke Skywalker and telling him that his nephew, Ben Solo, is beyond redemption. Once Luke finally agrees to train Rey, she starts having visions of Kylo Ren, but they're beyond normal Force visions. Instead, they're a little more like unplanned random FaceTime calls, and they imply a Force connection between the two characters that goes beyond just two people who fought one time. Both characters are confused by this. She also sees his tits and thinks about harnessing the power of the dark side. Then, Rey learns that back when Luke was training Ben, he sensed the darkness in him and thought about killing him one time. Typical uncle behavior. This sent Ben on a murder rampage. Typical nephew behavior. Once Rey hears about all this drama, she becomes convinced Kylo Ren can be saved, and leaves to go try and save him, proving herself to be the ultimate champion of the I can fix him lifestyle. Rey finds Kylo and he captures her, but then they have a team-up where they both kill the evil guy, Snoke, who seduced Ben to the dark side in the first place. Kylo goes all, "Stay with me, we can rule the galaxy together." "Stay with me, we can rule the galaxy together," on Rey. And she nopes the hell out of there. In her absence, and with his boss dead, Kylo Ren declares himself the supreme leader. Roll credits. The Last Jedi was wildly polarizing, even in the broader cultural conversation. People who loved to have theories about Star Wars were mad that it disproved or ignored their theories. People who loved to pick apart plot points were mad at it for having plot holes. People who suck were mad it was too progressive. That is to say, people were mad. Oh, also, people who hated Reylo were mad, because the film contained entirely too much Reylo. But these folks were powerless to stop the tidal wave that The Last Jedi set into motion, because this was the movie that turned Reylo from a controversial, medium popular ship into the most popular ship, not just of the sequel trilogy, but in all of Star Wars fandom. According to data archived in the Wayback Machine 1 month before The Last Jedi came out, there were 3,518 works in the Reylo tag on AO3. It was still solidly in third place for Star Wars ships, behind Kylo Ren x Hux and Finn x Poe. By the end of the January of 2018, a month and a half after the release of The Last Jedi, Reylo overtook Finn x Poe to be the second most popular ship in the Star Wars tag on AO3. By mid-April of 2019, Reylo also overtook Kylo Ren x Hux and became the most popular Star Wars ship on AO3, a lead it retains to this day. I actually made a chart about it using data collected from the Wayback Machine. Disclaimer, I am not a statistician. I got a 3 in AP Stats in high school, and I haven't taken a math class since, but I did my best. So, here is the data on the 3 most popular Star Wars sequel fandom ships from January of 2016 to June of 2022. I chose this window of time because it should show the aftermath of the release of all 3 Star Wars sequel films, but not be affected by the mass deletion of works on AO3 by their authors, which began in December of 2022 as the result of an AI model training scare that circulated Tumblr. You can see here the original rankings of these pairings, as well as how they shifted in popularity over time. Now, you might be wondering, hey, Eli, you said 3 Star Wars sequel films, but you've only talked about 2. Which brings us to The Rise of Skywalker, a movie I have now had the misfortune of watching. I hadn't watched it before I started writing the script for this video, and now I have, and it made my life worse. If you are forced to watch this movie, I recommend doing so either as a drinking game or with your closest out-of-touch relative or friend who knows basically nothing about Star Wars. I chose the latter, and the whole time he kept calling Rey the girlfriend of Kylo Ren and Kylo Ren the boyfriend of Rey. So with this hard evidence, I think it's safe to say that The Rise of Skywalker made Reylo canon. Unfortunately for all of us, Reylos and non-Reylos alike, it did so in a way that made absolutely no one happy. The plot of the movie is this. It turns out the big bad guy who made Ben evil, the one that he killed at the end of the last movie, was just a puppet for a bigger, badder guy, Emperor Palpatine. Hey, that's the guy from the other movies. Rey goes on a fetch quest of the whole movie to try and kill this dude and continues to grapple with the dark side. Ben chases her around and they fight, and then his mom dies so hard that he stops being evil. We get about 10 minutes of redeemed Ben Solo in this movie, and then Rey dies, and then she comes back to life when Ben holds her in his arms, and then Ben kisses Rey so hard that he dies. So, anyway, everybody hated this movie. But its 2019 release did see a huge spike in Reylo fanfictions written afterwards, one which firmly cemented the pairing's now undisputed status as the most popular Star Wars ship. Many of these were what is often called fix-it fics, which makes a lot of sense given how unhappy fans were with how the film ended. So, that's the history of Reylo's rise to the status of the most popular ship in the Star Wars fandom. But this doesn't quite take us to where we are now, or to how we got here, or to me talking about all of these books that I read for some reason. To get there, I'm afraid we're going to have to talk about Twilight. Because what's happening right now with Reylo has actually happened before. In October of 2005, an author named Stephanie Meyer published her debut novel, Twilight. This is not a video about Twilight, though trust me, there are plenty of great ones out there, so I'll keep my summary here brief. The novel is about an ordinary teenage girl named Bella Swan who falls in love with an immortal vampire named Edward Cullen, and its sequels are about the things that keep them apart and the reasons their love triumphs over those things, or whatever. It's Twilight. You've heard of Twilight. In all likelihood, you've also heard of the most well-known Twilight fanfiction, a story called Master of the Universe by author Snow Queen's Ice Dragon. In it, Edward is a multimillionaire CEO, and Bella interviews him, which leads to the two beginning an intense BDSM-centric sexual relationship. If this plot summary rings a bell but the title doesn't, you might know it under a different name, 50 Shades of Grey by author E.L. James. This process of taking a work published as fanfiction and changing names and details or rewriting chunks of text to remove any resemblance to the original source material is commonly referred to as filing off the serial numbers. According to fan lore, this term has been in use since at least 1996. 50 Shades of Grey was not the first fanfiction of a copywritten media property to file off the serial numbers for publication. According to scholar Lauren McInnes, that honor goes to the 1985 gay romance novel Cowboy Blues, which began as a Starsky and Hutch fanfiction, but 50 Shades was certainly the first example to accrue any significant amount of commercial success, and accrue commercial success it did. While it was first put out as a self-published work in 2011, Vintage Books, an imprint of the major publisher Random House, picked the book up for traditional publication in 2012 in a 7-figure series deal with author E.L. James. This move put 50 Shades on bookstore, library, grocery store, and airport shelves all around the world, and accidentally made a bunch of middle-aged book club attendees get into unsafe BDSM practices, if the headlines at the time are to be believed. Two sequels, 50 Shades Darker and 50 Shades Freed, were also published in 2012 by Vintage Books. According to NPD Bookscan, the 50 Shades trilogy occupied all 3 top spots on their list of best-selling books of the 2010s in the United States, beating out The Hunger Games, The Help, The Fault in Our Stars, and all other massively successful releases of the decade. This was likely aided by the release of the similarly successful, though broadly agreed upon to be terrible, movie adaptations of the 50 Shades trilogy starring Dakota Johnson and Jamie Dornan. So, all of this is to say that 50 Shades of Grey and its sequels were absolutely, absurdly, wildly successful. And, like when any book gains broad mainstream success, the publishing industry noticed. Not long after 50 Shades of Grey was released, the market was absolutely flooded with read-alikes. Many of these books were takes on near-identical premises. Beautiful but ordinary every woman enters definitely unhealthy sexual relationship with dominant, incredibly wealthy, borderline abusive but I can fix him man. There were dozens of these, all with alarmingly similar and vague titles and covers which aimed to capture the attention of even a small portion of the 50 Shades audience. But some publishers took a different approach to capitalizing off of the success of the 50 Shades trilogy. Clearly, despite Vintage's attempts to smother word that 50 Shades had started out as Twilight fanfiction, word had gotten out. A quick sidebar on publishing. In 2012, at the release of 50 Shades, 6 publishing houses, commonly referred to as the Big Six, controlled much of the market. In 2013, Penguin and Random House merged, giving us the Big Five we have today. As of 2022, these 5 major publishers control over 80% of the trade book market in the US and make most of the decisions about which books make it to bookstore shelves. Back to Twilight fanfiction. As far as I can tell, starting in 2011 with the release of 50 Shades of Grey, 8 debut novels were put out by major publishers which originated as Twilight fanfiction. I believe this was the result of both Twilight fanfiction authors and major publishing houses attempting to capitalize off of the success of 50 Shades of Grey. Of the 7 non-50 Shades novels, I would describe 4 as being significantly different from 50 Shades in terms of premise. These are Gabriel's Inferno by Sylvain Reynard, which explores a professor-graduate-student relationship, Clipped Wings by Helena Hunting, which follows a relationship between a tattoo artist and one of his clients, Bad Romeo by Lisa Raven, which focuses on a relationship between 2 actors, and Semper by J.M. Darhauer, which follows a mafia son, Edward type, and a Bella type slave. Yes, apparently this is a romance novel about modern slavery for white people. I think this is a good time to say that. I do not endorse, support, or recommend any of the Twilight fanfiction novels discussed here. I have not read any of them, and frankly, I would never do that for free. On the other hand, I would say the remaining 3 Twilight fanfiction novels were fairly similar to 50 Shades in terms of premise and content. These are The Submissive by Tara Sumi, the original fanfiction for which was allegedly actually an inspiration for 50 Shades and not the other way around, A Million Dirty Secrets by C.L. Parker, where the Bella type sells herself into sex slavery to pay off her mother's medical debt, and Beautiful Bastard, the debut novel by authors Christina Hobbs and Lauren Billings, writing under the collective pen name of Christina Lauren, which focuses on a boss-employee relationship. I'd argue Beautiful Bastard is notable in a way that the others on this list are not, because since its release, Christina Hobbs and Lauren Billings have achieved massive mainstream writing success beyond the realm of erotica writing as Christina Lauren, with recent contemporary romance hits including The Unhoneymooners and The Paradise Problem. Remember the name Christina Lauren, because we're not done with these two yet. Every single one of these books has at least one direct sequel, and some have several, so as far as I can tell, there are actually at least 28 full-length novels from major publishing houses that started out as Twilight fanfiction, 31 if you include the 50 Shades series. And that's just including works from major publishers. Independent publishers and self-published books have a much lower barrier to entry, and so I did not endeavor to make a comprehensive list of all of them. But I did track down a few, many of which are from one e-publisher called Omnific, which distributes through Simon & Schuster. Basically, they're an independent publisher that has a deal with Simon & Schuster to get their books in front of more people. Gabriel's Inferno, the Professor Grad student book I just mentioned, was first published through Omnific before being picked up by Penguin Random House. Other Twilight fanfiction novels from this publisher include Boycotts and Barflies by Victoria Michaels, Wallbanger by Alice Clayton, The Unidentified Redhead by Alice Clayton, Take the Cake by Sandra Wright, and The Plan by Gwen Salisbury. It's unclear to me whether Omnific started out with the intent to publish books that used to be fanfiction, but I found on a 2010 forum post that their FAQ used to directly address this issue. They answered a question asking if they published fanfiction as follows.
No, we do not publish fanfiction. What you can do is take anything that is your original idea, plot, characterization, etc., and develop it into a manuscript using original characters that are your own creation.
This is no longer in their FAQ. The forum I found it on seemed to be convinced that this might cause them to face some legal issues, which may be the cause for the change, but I cannot say this definitively. What I can say is that Omnific clearly massively profited off of the trend of Twilight fanfictions gaining publication with their serial numbers filed off as original novels. Remember this model, it will come up again later. Okay, so, how did all this happen, and how does it relate to Reylo? If you were listening closely as I gave the elevator pitch for each of those novels from major publishers, you may have noticed something a bit strange. Despite all starting off as Twilight fanfiction, not a single one of those published books is about vampires. And they weren't vampires in any of the original fanfictions either. It's not that they were vampires in fanfiction, but this detail was changed in the publication process out of fear of litigation. Instead, all of these fanfictions were what we might call AU fanfictions, standing for Alternate Universe. Alternate Universe, or AU fanfic, takes a character from a piece of media out of their original setting and places them in an alternate universe. AU fanfiction might ask, what would Bella and Edward be like in a world without vampires? What if they were coworkers instead? What if they were actors? And the question at the heart of much AU fanfiction, how would this relationship look and develop in a different setting or context than the original story? All of the Twilight fanfictions I've just discussed were originally posted on the fanfiction hosting site fanfiction.net. For years, this was the most popular place to post fanfiction. However, this is no longer the case. Archive of Our Own, the website I showed you some graphs about earlier, is now the reigning champ of hosting fanfiction. This is where most of the Reylo fanfiction on the internet lives. I've already mentioned tagging as a system on AO3 to find fanfictions which are written about a certain pairing. However, the use of tagging on AO3 is actually a broader system that authors use to provide information about the contents of a work. Beyond the relationships present, you can tag the fandom, content warnings, and individual characters present in any given fanfiction. But there are also additional tags, which describe the content, setting, and often tone of the fic itself. Common labels might include fluff for light-hearted fanfiction that is often happy, or comforting in nature, alternate universe, which we've just discussed, or slow burn, which describes a relationship that develops slowly. The most popular additional tag for Reylo works on AO3 is alternate universe modern setting. Honestly, this struck me immediately as being a little odd. I did quite a bit of research on common tags for a previous video, and in the pairings I looked at, the top additional tag was almost always fluff. So I made another chart, this time comparing the percentage of fics tagged alternate universe modern setting amongst the 10 most popular ships in the Star Wars fandom on AO3. Reylo wins easily. It beats out the second place ship, Din Djarin x Luke Skywalker from The Mandalorian and original Star Wars trilogy, by more than 10%. In fact, Reylo appears to be one of the most saturated pairings on all of AO3 when it comes to modern AUs. I made another chart showing the large pairings, that is, pairings with over 10,000 fics, with the highest percentage of their total fanfictions tagged alternate universe modern setting, and Reylo comes out in third out of all of the large pairings. The only two that beat it are Enjolras and Grantaire from Les Miserables, a fandom with historical source material and a huge trend of college/university AUs, and Bellamy Blake and Clark Griffin from The 100, a show with a futuristic dystopian setting that the fandom seems to have decided has limited fic potential. I argue that a fandom like this has a greater potential for filing off the serial numbers and having its fanfictions undergo the process of traditional publication as an original work. My reason for this is simple. I think that many modern AU fanfictions, particularly in the Reylo fandom, are so dissimilar from the original work, in this case the Star Wars sequel trilogy, as to effectively already be works of original fiction in which the characters just happen to share names and broad archetypes with Star Wars characters. And sometimes they don't even share full names. Many modern AU Reylo fics were written before The Rise of Skywalker revealed Rey to be Palpatine's granddaughter, and thus at time of writing, Rey had no canonical surname. These authors all, in a way, made Rey their own original character by giving her a surname of their choice. The most common option, as far as I can tell, appears to have been Johnson, which seems to have started as a cheeky nod to Rian Johnson, the director of The Last Jedi, a film which I've already established that Reylos love. Frankly, removed from their original setting, these characters often only bear a surface-level similarity to their canon counterparts. Of course, placing a character in a different setting is bound to alter their personality somewhat, even if every attempt is made to keep mannerisms and characteristics the same. When you don't have the Force, you can't choke people with your mind, and choking people with your hands is a fundamentally different action with different implications. But I think it goes beyond this. In a 2013 blog post, which I stumbled upon through its citation in Francesca Coppa's The Fanfiction Reader, Mary Ellen, writing under the pen name Dr. Science, asserts that
fanfic is speculative fiction where the speculation is centered on a story or person thought of as a character. Science fiction is speculative fiction where the center is the nature of the world.
In their book, The Fanfiction Reader, Folktales for the Digital Age, author Francesca Coppa explains,
in science fiction, what if is a question that tends to be asked about the world. What if the world were different? Fan fiction tends to ask, what if about characters? What if a person were different?
I would argue that almost all of these works started off by asking this question, what if a person were different? Specifically, I think beyond the differences inherent to changing the setting of a story from outer space to New York or whatever, there is another force at play here, no pun intended, which changed the characters once in the writing of the original fanfiction and then again in their shift to romance novel status. In my opinion, many of the Ben Solo counterparts in these novels have as much in common with Mr. Darcy as they do with Kylo Ren. I believe that there are two fundamental shifts that have happened to these characters, accompanying their leaps from genre to genre. The first is this. When a character is written in a fanfiction, they are often influenced by more than just their on-screen portrayal. The common theories and interpretations in a fandom are often just as influential to the way a character is depicted in a fanfiction as the way that the movie's scripts are written and the way that Daisy Ridley and Adam Driver portrayed their characters. This body of collective theory is often referred to as fanon and stands in contrast from canon, which is whatever source material is actually on the page or screen or stage or whatever. This is one of the many ways that the culture of fandom has influenced these stories. We'll touch on a few more soon. The influence of fanon, then, can lead to characters in fanfictions looking significantly different than their originals with whom they share their names. I believe that this is actually particularly common in Reylo fanfiction, which I posit is a lot of why the characters in these novels are in many ways more similar to each other than anyone is to the Rey or Kylo Ren seen in the Star Wars sequel trilogy. The second factor I think causes these characters to end up behaving significantly differently from the Star Wars characters on whom they were originally based is perhaps more obvious, which is that every single one of these books went through some level of change in the process of editing for publication. I think this often led to the subtraction and addition of character details that do change the way a character feels. All that being said, I am still going to sometimes refer to the characters in these novels I'm about to discuss using their Star Wars names when it's relevant. But if I talk about some wild thing a character does in one of these books and you think, that doesn't sound like Rey from Star Wars, I want you to keep in mind that they are at least 2 steps removed from their original forms, some even more. If you think, this sounds exactly like Kylo Ren though, I mean, they did start out as fanfiction. Alright, surely that was a normal amount of time to spend giving context and history. Now, without further ado, let's talk about the books. Welcome to Book Club. I'm your host, Eli Evil Eye. There are a total of 13 books I'm going to be discussing today, 10 of which are true Reylo books. That is, I have definitive proof that the same story was previously published by the same author in some form online as a fanfiction about Rey and Kylo Ren from Star Wars. And 3 of which are edge cases I've included because I think they're relevant. There are a lot more books which are inspired by Reylo or have love interests that the author clearly wants to be played by Adam Driver, or that are written by authors who at some point independently and separately wrote Reylo fanfiction that I have chosen to exclude for the most part because this took me 8 months and I had to stop somewhere. So, the first Reylo fanfiction to have its serial numbers filed off for publication as an original novel from a major publisher was Ali Hazelwood's The Love Hypothesis, which was published by Berkeley, an imprint of Penguin Random House, in September of 2021. If you've only heard of one Reylo book, it's probably this one. The Love Hypothesis started its life as a Reylo fanfiction titled Head Over Feet after an Alanis Morissette song, posted chapter by chapter by the author Ever So Reylo to Archive of Our Own starting in October of 2018 and finishing in August of 2019. At some point in the following year or so, according to an interview with Collider, Hazelwood posted on social media that she was considering pulling some of her fanfictions off of Archive of Our Own to rework them into original novels. Hazelwood describes what happened next like this.
My agent started reading my fanfiction on AO3 and then she reached out with a DM. She was like, I saw that you wrote something about maybe pulling some of your fics and reworking them, and I wanted to tell you that I'm a literary agent and I would love to see some of your manuscripts if you're interested in it. And so that's how I took the fanfiction of mine that I thought was the most reworkable, and I sent it to her and then I signed with her.
That fanfiction was Head Over Feet, which became The Love Hypothesis. Hazelwood and her agent Tao Lee apparently shopped the novel around to quite a few publishers before eventually selling it to Berkeley, an imprint of Penguin Random House. The version of The Love Hypothesis that hit shelves in September of 2021 contained significant rewrites from the original Head Over Feet, though it definitely wasn't an entirely distinct book either. A lot of the main changes are structural, scenes were condensed, expanded, removed, and added, characters were moved around, and generally the plot was rearranged to make sense outside of a fanfiction context. Hazelwood noted in that same interview discussed above that The Love Hypothesis received a lot of R&Rs, that is, revise and resubmits, in the publication process, which means that a lot of publishers declined the book, but gave detailed feedback as to why, which allowed Hazelwood to make targeted edits to her manuscript. But There are also chunks that are identical between the original fanfiction and the novel. In particular, a lot of dialogue between the Rey character and the Ben character is word for word the same in The Love Hypothesis as in Head Over Feet. So, wait, what is the Love Hypothesis? I'm so glad you asked, hypothetical viewer. The Love Hypothesis is a fake dating, mutual pining, slow burn grad school AU fic, of course. Sorry. What I meant to say was that the Love Hypothesis follows graduate student Olive, as she attempts to fake a relationship with Professor Adam. Get it? Like the guy from the movies? To prevent her best friend, Anne, from being sad, and also she's trying to get a job from Tom, but he's a bad dude, so it doesn't work out, and then Olive and Adam end up in a series of increasingly absurd situations where they have to prove that they're dating, and then they fall for each other for real, but can't get together for a few hundred pages because that's how the book happens. A lot of critiques of this book, I feel, inappropriately claim that this book's background as fanfiction is the reason parts of it are so ridiculously improbable, but as someone who reads a lot of adult contemporary romance novels, I think that's silly, because they're all like this. Haters aside, this book did incredibly, extremely, absurdly well, especially for a debut novel. In my opinion, there were 3 main factors that contributed to its success. The first is the buzz around it having started out as a fanfiction. This ended up being a pretty good marketing technique, both because Hazelwood really did have a built-in audience from her time writing as Ever So Reylo, and because plenty of people who had some kind of opinion on Reylo in specific or fanfiction as a whole wanted to see what everyone else was talking about. The second factor is TikTok. 2020 and 2021 saw massive growth in an online community on TikTok that called itself Book Talk. As Michael Deswani discussed in his article, TikTok's peer pedagogies, learning about books through #BookTalk videos.
#BookTalk accounts and videos operate within particular esoteric subcultures and communities of users who are book savvy and that feature regular readers. Videos and associated comments in these communities offer fans an opportunity to discover new authors and books and to enter into conversations about books and reading that may otherwise be unavailable to them, and which invite them to take up identities as readers.
Book Talk, by turning reading into a sort of social capital, encouraged teenage and adult readers alike to engage with and emotionally respond to literature. In this way, it served as a point of entry for potentially reluctant viewers, as well as allowing prolific readers to share their favorite books and find new recommendations. The Love Hypothesis came out in what I would call the peak era of Book Talk, where TikTok's algorithm was really pushing Book Talk videos because they performed well. The Love Hypothesis absolutely benefited from this system of recommendation, and I argue that it was critical to the book's success. The third factor I'd credit for the Love Hypothesis' success is that it is, in fact, a pretty good book. Let's talk about it in the review zone. Okay, so I have come up with 5 criteria with which to evaluate how good a Reylo romance novel is. These are not necessarily comprehensive and are also highly subjective because I made them up. If you had read all of these books, you might do this differently, and that's okay. But I read all of these books, and it's consumed 8 months of my life, and I make the rules here. So, my categories are: characterization. Did the characters feel like real people? Were they well-rounded? Did they behave in ways that people behave? Was their characterization consistent throughout? 2. Core relationship. Did I believe these 2 characters were in love? Was I rooting for them? Did their chemistry feel genuine? Plot and pacing. Was there a plot or tension outside of the couple's will they or won't they? Did the plot engage me? Was the story well paced? This category in particular is one where I feel a lot of fanfiction falls short. Is it cringe? This is a bit of a catch-all. If there were sex scenes, were they well written or did they make me cringe? If there were jokes, were they funny or did they make me cringe? If there were references to Star Wars or Reylo fanfiction in jokes, were they clever or did they make me cringe? A high score in this category means they did a good job. A low score means I was cringing. 5. All the feels. This one is my subjectivity category. If I cried, if I kicked my feet when they kissed, if I was biting my nails when they broke up in the 3rd act, if I loved their love, it gets points here. Each category is on a 5-star scale, except this is a video about the Star Wars sequel trilogy, so we're going to rate them out of 5-star destroyers. And then it'll get a total score. These are the Love Hypothesis's scores. All of this is to say that I like this book. The jokes are funny, the tension between the characters is well written, and the non-romance plot actually doesn't entirely suck, which is more than most adult contemporary romance novels, and also most of the other books I'm going to talk about here, can say for themselves. This is the gold standard for Reylo books, alright? Everything that comes after this has to try to live up to this, because without the Love Hypothesis, I'm not convinced any of the rest of these books would have ever hit shelves. Plus it sets the tone for how much Reylo authors love to talk about how big their Kylo-type characters are. More on that in a second. So, the Love Hypothesis performed so well that Berkley put out 3 more novellas from Hazelwood less than 6 months after its release. These novellas were Under One Roof in February of 2022, Stuck With You in March of 2022, and Below Zero in April of 2022. As far as I can tell, the individual separate novellas were only released digitally, but in January of 2023, they were collected into the Loathe to Love You collection, which received physical publication as well. This little miniseries, called The Steminists upon release, followed 3 best friends as they each had their own little enemies to lovers romance. The other thing they have in common, of course, is that they are all Reylo fics with the serial numbers scratched off. Under One Roof, a much shorter version of which was published on AO3 in July of 2018 as You Should See the Things We Do, follows environmental engineer Mara, who has to share a house with big oil lawyer Liam for plot reasons. They initially hate each other, and then they become friends, and then they have intercourse. Good for them. I gave this book 4 Star Destroyers overall, and I think it's the strongest of the 3 novellas for 2 reasons. First, my pet theory is that since this one came out a while after the Love Hypothesis, but the other 2 came out a month after each other, Hazelwood may have had more time to work on this. Like, this one had some semblance of a real plot and conflict, and the characters feel the most like people. Second, since I read this one first, I was not yet subject to the hell of reading 3 consecutive books about the same 2 characters wearing a thin disguise as being about different characters in each one. The 3 Reys are friends with each other, y'all. It's hard to read. The narration mentions how big Liam is 15 separate times in this one. I counted. Next to come out, and strongly middle of the pack, is Stuck With You, originally published to AO3 as Stuck in November of 2018 as a 6,000-word one-shot. A one-shot is a short fanfiction told in 1 chapter, before being heavily expanded into a novella. In this one, superstitious soccer fan and green engineer Sadie is stuck in an elevator with Danish engineering firm partner Eric with a K, who she really hates because she once had really good sex with him, but then he maybe stole one of her firm's clients. This one is fine. I gave it 3.5 Star Destroyers. I think the chemistry between the 2 characters is pretty solid, but the individual characterization is a bit flimsy and the plot is basically non-existent. I think this may once again come from the fact that this started as a 6,000-word fanfiction, which was then turned into a 120-ish page, about 35,000-word novella with a quick turnaround. Here you start to go, hey, all of these girls are the same girl with only surface level details changed. What the hell? The narration mentions how big Eric is 16 separate times in this one. The third and final and worst of the Steminist novellas is Below Zero, originally published to AO3 as 2,000 Miles Away in March of 2020, somehow mere months before the release of The Love Hypothesis. This, too, was dramatically revised and expanded. It follows Hannah, an aerospace engineer for NASA who is stranded in a crevasse in the Arctic while on a science expedition and must be rescued by her one-night stand from 5 years ago, another engineering prodigy and NASA employee named Ian. Below Zero tries to have a plot even harder than the other 2. Unfortunately, in my opinion, it also fails the hardest at this. At this point in her career, Hazelwood was not able to convince me that the stakes were life and death. More than the other 2, this one feels like a rush job. In another world, this book could have been a full novel. The protagonist here, Hannah, feels a bit like she may have served as the blueprint for the protagonist of Hazelwood's most recent release at time of filming, Not in Love, but the archetype of emotionally closed-off woman who doesn't date is much more interesting in that novel. In this novella, she sleeps with this dude once, and then he rescues her from a near-death experience, and then she changes her mind and actually becomes someone who, in fact, does date. Still, I gave it 3 Star Destroyers overall, because it was readable. The narration mentions how big Ian is 23 times, and then for good measure also mentions how big Liam and Eric are once because they show up in this one. They get along shockingly well, considering that they are all the same man, and that man is also this man. So, those are all of the works of Ali Hazelwood that started out as Reylo novels. Though she would continue to explore similar character archetypes and relationship dynamics to Reylo in many of her releases that followed, I could find no evidence that any of Hazelwood's later books were ever actually previously published as fanfiction. But, of course, that was not the end of the Reylo publishing phenomenon. Instead, Hazelwood's wildly successful debut and the 3 novellas that followed were just the beginning. The next notable Reylo release was Go Hex Yourself by Jessica Clare, also published with Berkeley. If you were to just look at the cover and read the blurb for this book, you would say to me, of course this started its life as Reylo fanfiction, what are you even talking about? But I must tell you a hard truth in this moment. As far as I could tell, in all of my probably too extensive research for this project, I found no evidence whatsoever that the story that became Go Hex Yourself was actually published anywhere as Reylo fanfiction ever. Yes, the author has tweeted about Reylo. Yes, the cover blurb was written by Ali Hazelwood. Yes, there are direct parallel characters to Rey, Ben, Finn, Poe, Rose, Hux, Luke, and Phasma. Yes, the main characters' names are literally Ben and Reggie. Yes, they look like that. But I have no proof that it ever lived a life as Reylo fanfiction. I did read it, though, so I might as well talk about it. Whether or not it was ever previously published as such, Go Hex Yourself still clearly profited off of having the reputation as and appearance of being Reylo fanfiction. It was marketed to Reylos, is what I'm saying, and, in my opinion, attempted to benefit from the success of the love hypothesis. The premise is this. Ordinary girl, orphan, mousy, brunette Reggie Johnson applies to a job in a newspaper ad that she thinks is basically for Magic the Gathering. They call it Spellcraft the Magicking. Side note, this is not the only book on this list in which the inciting incident is a dubiously phrased ad. Anyway, she takes the job, but it turns out the job is actually working as a familiar for a real-life witch who is Girl Luke, Aunt Drew. However, when Aunt Luke goes into a magic coma, Reggie and Aunt Luke's big brooding nephew, Ben, must work together to figure out how to save her. This book is solidly middle of the pack. My favorite things about it were the extended cast, all of whom I enjoyed, especially the Aunt Luke character, the fact that it slightly broke romance genre conventions in terms of structure, and the cute magic system. My least favorite things were that Ben was 500 and Reggie was 25, the cringe level was fairly high, and the writing and style in general felt a bit bland to me. 3.5 Star Destroyers. Our next book on the list is the other main one that has an asterisk next to it. The Dead Romantics was Ashley Poston's adult romance debut, though she previously made a name for herself in the YA sphere, notably writing Geekerella, a fangirl fairy tale, in 2017. As that book's title may indicate, Poston has a history of involvement in internet fan culture. In June of 2022, she released The Dead Romantics, published once more by Berkeley. Like Go Hex Herself, though The Dead Romantics was, as far as I can tell, never published online as Reylo fanfiction, it does bear more than surface-level similarities to the pairing. Unlike Go Hex Yourself, the author herself has confirmed that this is not a coincidence. In a July 2022 panel, she said that the book did in fact start its life as Reylo fanfiction, originally under the working title of Force Ghost Coast to Coast, which I find hilarious. The Dead Romantic starts with Florence Day, a novelist turned romance ghostwriter who no longer believes in love, getting a metaphorical slap in the face from her new editor, Benji Andor, when he refuses to grant her a deadline extension for the book she hasn't written yet. However, despite these early characters seeming like a solid fanfiction setup, The Dead Romantics departs more heavily from the Reylo model as the story goes on. Florence is forced to return to the small town that she grew up in and the family funeral home to bury her beloved father. That's right, folks. This is not a drill. This Rey has a dad and a mom and siblings, and they love her. The twist is, her entire life, Florence has been able to see ghosts. And when she returns to her hometown, a new ghost starts to haunt her. Benji Andor, the slightly mean editor from before, who got hit by a car and died? In my opinion, despite the twists being fairly predictable to me, The Dead Romantics is one of the best books on this list. While there is definitely still that classic Reylo, strong, loyal, down bad big man, and emotionally unavailable, unrealized potential commitment-phobe woman dynamic, the plot of this book is genuinely compelling, and I felt like the emotional beats really landed. It's also worth noting that unlike many of the other books on this list, this book does not wear its Reylo origins on its sleeve. Adam Driver is nowhere to be seen on the cover. To me, the Reylo status of this book feels more like a footnote than the main talking point. Though, Ali Hazelwood did blurb it, so what do I know? I gave The Dead Romantics the full 5 Star Destroyers. It's a good book. Our next release is The Nanny, debut novel by Lana Ferguson, which was published in April of 2013 by Berkeley. We're going to start with my plot summary and rating here, and then dive into the Reylo backstory, because this book and author's fandom history is storied and controversial, and when I talk about it, I want you to be keeping in mind what book we're talking about here. Okay? Great. The Nanny follows Cassie Evans, our Rey of the Day, after she loses her job at a children's hospital so that the book can happen. Desperate for a new job so she can continue paying her tuition, she takes a live-in nannying gig for Aiden, a fancy chef and single dad with bad work-life balance, looking after Sophie, one of those sweet children from romance novels that make you think that the author has never encountered an actual child in the real world. She finds the job in an ad posting. This is the second of 3 books where this happens. The twist is that the last time she lost her job and needed to pay tuition, Cassie started an OnlyFans, except she got too close to a client and got her heart broken when he ghosted her. Turns out Aiden was that OnlyFan. What a coincidence. Bad professional boundaries ensue, the two have a lot of intercourse and even more miscommunication, and this eventually leads to one of the worst, most out-of-character third act breakups I've had the misfortune of reading. They deal with it entirely too quickly, given how long this book was, and then they all live happily ever after, yay! I gave The Nanny 2 Star Destroyers because I didn't like reading it. In another life, The Nanny was I've Got You Under My Skin by author Kylo Trash Forever, posted to AO3 chapter by chapter from May to July of 2020. The fic was taken down while still incomplete, with only 19 out of 25 chapters posted, seemingly in order to be rewritten as an original novel. Around this time, Kylo Trash Forever took down all of her 100 or so works from AO3. Later, folks on Reddit would point to the controversy the author saw as the reason for this mass deletion, but because of timeline reasons, I don't think this is the case. I think it has to do with her going professional with her writing. Now, you might be asking, what controversy? In 2018, author Kylo Trash Forever posted a fanfiction called Into the Woods. This was a fairly direct take on Beauty and the Beast, the Disney movie, not the original fairy tale. The fanfiction used the ABO trope, short for Alpha, Beta, Omega, which refers to... What has my life become? How is this only my second video? I feel like I've been here for 1,000 years. ABO imposes the outdated archetypes of wolves as being alphas, betas, or omegas onto human beings as secondary sexes. So, in addition to being assigned male or female at birth, people in ABO universes develop a secondary sex, usually during puberty, which makes them an alpha, a beta, or an omega. This affects them in a whole host of ways, but it's most relevant to us in that naturally dominant alphas and naturally submissive omegas have extra special, vaguely wolf-like ways of having sex with each other, and they feel a biological urge to do so deeper than regular attraction, okay? Oh, and also it started in the community of people on the internet who ship the actors from the TV show Supernatural with each other in real life. Okay? So, This fanfiction, Into the Woods, had Beauty, Rey, as one of these Omegas and the Beast, Ben, as one of the Alphas. But because Kylo Trash Forever drew directly from Disney's Beauty and the Beast film for this, there was also a Gaston equivalent. The author chose Finn to fill this role because she didn't like his character, for reasons she assured people in her comment section were not racially motivated. The people in the comments section, as well as on Tumblr and Twitter, were not convinced, and took issue with the ways that Finn's portrayal in the fic echoed racist stereotypes of black men as domineering and sexually aggressive, especially when contrasted with Finn's generally kind demeanor in the actual movies. There's no way around it. Reylo fans on the whole are super weird about Finn. There's truly no other way to put it. Actor John Boyega, after the release of The Rise of Skywalker, posted a video to Twitter chronicling just a fraction of the online hate he received for portraying a character some Reylo fans saw as a threat to their ship becoming canon. Best case scenario in many of these fics, Finn is Rey's gay best friend. Worst case scenario, he's Gaston. In a fandom that is dominated by white women and girls, this is deeply troubling. I'm nowhere near the first person to talk about this, and I've linked in the description to several articles that I feel explore the issue in greater depth than I can here, but I don't want to dismiss this. The way Reylo fans engage with the character of Finn is often racist. From what I've read on the topic, though I do not think Kylo Trash Forever would ever consider herself to be a racist, and I do not think she intentionally wrote Finn in a racist manner as a commentary on what she personally thinks of black men in society, I believe that this portrayal was nonetheless influenced by and served to embolden racial stereotypes tangled up in the Reylo fandom's relationship to the character. That was 6 years ago, and seemingly not long after, she hid the fic in question from her profile, even before deleting the rest of her works in 2020. Despite the aesthetic similarities of the characters on the cover of The Nanny to Rey and Ben, Ferguson seems to have taken pretty significant steps to distance herself from her past life as Kylo Trash Forever. Pretty much all of this information is stuff I had to piece together from old Reddit and Tumblr posts, since she mostly nuked her fandom accounts somewhere around 2020. So please don't go harass her. Seriously, please. Please. Don't bother this woman. Thanks. Moving on. Our next novel is You Again by Kate Goldbeck, published in August of 2023 by, drumroll please, Random House. That's right, a publisher that isn't Berkeley has decided to throw their hat into the ring. Yes, they're owned by the same parent company as Berkeley, whatever. Variety is the spice of life. You Again started its life as doing The Unstuck by slip going under a direct gender-swapped When Harry Met Sally AU, where Rey is Harry and Ben is Sally, which was posted chapter by chapter starting in September of 2018 and finishing in August of 2019. Goldbeck hid the fic in 2020, sometime around when editor Gaia Banks reached out to her via DM and eventually signed her, though, like Hazelwood, the rest of her Reylo fanfiction remains available for public consumption, and she has made no effort to distance her professional identity from her time in fandom. By the time it hit shelves, You Again still bore resemblance to doing The Unstuck, but had also been pretty significantly edited. It follows aspiring comedian Ari and prestigious chef Josh, who initially meet because Josh, who believes in true love, is sleeping with Ari's roommate, who Ari is also sleeping with. Ari, of course, does not believe in true love or sleeping over after hookups because she's Rey. The two ran into each other several more times over the years until both of their lives hit rock bottom, and they both form a close friendship, mostly on the basis of commiserating. Something I enjoyed about this book was how interestingly it subverted the very gendered premise of When Harry Met Sally, which often asks the question, can men and women just be friends, and eventually lands on, nope, as the answer. By following a bisexual protagonist whose bisexuality is front and center of her characterization, You Again manages to keep and explore the interesting things When Harry Met Sally has to say about friendships and relationships, while discarding some of its more poorly aged sexism and heteronormativity. It also manages to transcend its origins as Reylo fic, giving both Ari and Josh their own well-fleshed-out personalities. My only real complaint was that the pacing was pretty uneven. I gave You Again 4 Star Destroyers. Our next book is My Roommate is a Vampire by Jenna Levine. In its past life, this story was My Roommate's a Virgin Vampire by Gino 2. This started off as a chatfic, a fanfiction where information is communicated through alternative formats like text messages, posted on Twitter, where it remains to this day before being polished and posted to AO3, from which it has since been removed. This all happened in August of 2020. It was later published as My Roommate is a Vampire in August of 2023 by, surprise, surprise, Berkeley. My Roommate is a Vampire follows starving artist Cassie as she replies to a dubious Craigslist ad, there's the last ad, for a suspiciously cheap Chicago apartment and finds herself roommates with a real weird dude by the name of Frederick J. Fitzwilliam. When she finds bags of blood in his fridge, he comes clean and reveals that he's actually a vampire who has been in a coma for the past century and only got a roommate to try and help him adjust to 21st century life. My favorite thing about this book is how absolutely, unapologetically, absurdly silly it is. There's a shopping montage. It ends with a heist. His name is Frederick J. Fitzwilliam. The haters on Goodreads said this book was not very good, but they don't understand it like I understand it, okay? The book, as published, doesn't bear very much resemblance to the original Reylo fic in the scheme of things. Cassie is definitely a Ray type, but I found Frederick J. Fitzwilliam very fresh feeling in a sea of otherwise very similar Kylo Ren types. This may have to do with the word difference. The original fic is only something like 10,000 words, which is shorter than the script of this video, and something like 1/8 to 1/10 the length of the actual published novel. I give this book 5 Star Destroyers because it's my video and I can do what I want, okay? Our next book is another big name. If you've heard of one Reylo book, it's probably The Love Hypothesis, but if you've heard of 2 Reylo books, the other one is probably The Hurricane Wars by Thea Guanzin. Originally published on AO3 as fandom classic Landscape with a Blur of Conquerors by Diasterisms, this fic saw significant acclaim and hype even before it was announced that it would be receiving traditional publication. My real-life Reylo enjoyer friend said this about it when they sent it to me in 2021 to read, not long before it was taken off of AO3.
Long boy. Forced marriage. Basically like Game of Thrones, but Star Wars.
I did not read it then, sorry man, but I did read several other fics by the same author at my friend's recommendation, and I liked those fics. Unfortunately for everyone involved, I did not like The Hurricane Wars. The Hurricane Wars was published as the first in what looks like it's going to be a trilogy by HarperCollins in October of 2023, and it covered only a portion of the plot of the original fic, likely due to the fact that the original fic was 362,850 words long, about the length of 3 to 4 novels. The Hurricane Wars underwent significant changes between its life as a Star Wars fanfiction and its life as a romantasy novel, the most notable of which was the creation of an entirely new setting. See, unlike every other work on this list, Landscape with the Blur of Conquerors was not an alternate universe fanfiction. It is set in the canon Star Wars universe, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, and utilizing lore from the Star Wars extended universe novels, comics, and shows to create a sprawling space opera. Meanwhile, the Hurricane Wars takes place on one fantasy world, not in outer space. In terms of general vibe and tone, it falls somewhere between Sarah J. Maas's A Court of Thorns and Roses and Leigh Bardugo's Shadow and Bone series. According to the author, the book's world building is heavily influenced by Filipino mythology, and I think the times where this world building is allowed to shine are actually highlights of the book. The book follows Taliesin, a freedom fighter for the anti-fascist resistance with secret light powers, as her side loses the war against the Night Empire, and she is forced to retreat to another nation of which she is the secret princess. She clashes repeatedly with Prince Alaric, scion of the Night Empire and haver of not-so-secret dark powers. The two learn that their magic combines to become extra special magic and are forced into an arranged marriage in order to save the world. Of course, both have their own secret motives for complying with the arrangement, and also they begin to develop real feelings for each other. Like I said before, I did not particularly enjoy this book, which surprised me because I enjoyed the author's fanfiction. Unfortunately, the whole time I was reading it, I sort of wished I was reading the original fanfiction instead. This book was very front-loaded with its world building, which may have worked better in Star Wars context, but my main problem was that despite changing the magic system and world, it still fundamentally operated on Star Wars logic, which feels very tonally dissonant with the more grounded setting. Like, in Star Wars, if a planet falls to the Empire, that's bad, but it often feels abstract because of the scope. But by turning the broader, less individual number of planets into the more concrete nations, which have a real-world equivalent, you're forced to grapple with the fact that countries have governments and cities and real people that actually would be very impacted by a land takeover. To me, the book feels completely unwilling to grapple with these stakes for more than brief moments. I think this originates from how the readers of the fanfiction are expected to understand in shorthand what happens when the Empire takes over a planet because we see it in Star Wars. So they of course wouldn't need to explain it to us. But this is no longer a Star Wars fanfiction. And so this created a strong tonal dissonance for me and significantly undermined the stakes. Also, this is petty. They say the Hurricane Wars like once a chapter, like direct to camera. People in a war do not name drop the war they're in that often. If they turned to the camera and said, it's time for a war, a Star War, in Star Wars, I'd be so mad. However, the Hurricane Wars also provide something that I'd argue no other book on this list does, a true enemies to lovers romance with the same stakes as it has in Star Wars canon. These two start out the book straight up attempting to murder each other in a way you can't really get away with in an adult contemporary romance novel. I think this is then perhaps the most Reylo book on this list. Still, I gave the Hurricane Wars 2 Star Destroyers. When I first started this script, 1,000 years ago, I thought this was it, and I would be free after I read the Hurricane Wars. But then I did the worst thing I could possibly do, more research, and I found 3 more. Sweeten the Deal is another edge case. It follows the same core idea as a fanfiction by the same author, but it is not a direct adaptation, and the original fanfiction remains available on the author's archive of her own. The fanfiction is called Sugar Honey Honey, posted chapter by chapter by yours truly, Commander Shepard, between March and November of 2019, at which point it was discontinued at chapter 10 out of 13. The fanfiction follows accidental heiress turned sugar mommy Ray, who meets sugar baby Ben through an app. Sweeten the Deal was written by Katie Shepard and published by Berkeley, the imprint of Penguin, in October of 2023. It was Shepard's second book. The plot is roughly similar to that of the fanfiction I discussed, but it is an entirely distinct work. There aren't, as far as my plagiarism similarity checkers could tell, any direct scenes transplanted from the fanfiction to the novel. I reached out to the author via Twitter DM to try and figure out how directly the two are connected, and in her words,
I think of Sugar Honey Honey as the acorn of Sweeten the Deal. I really liked the premise and tropes, but got so sad about the rise of Skywalker that I couldn't finish it.
Sweeten the Deal follows 23-year-old MBA student and former tennis player Caroline as she attempts to navigate her newfound status as an heiress. She decides to find a sugar baby to show her the ways of the cultural world, and in steps 33-year-old Adrian, a starving artist looking for a way to pay rent. I found this book to be a real breath of fresh air this deep into my reading list. Adrian and Caroline were really compelling characters. Caroline, in particular, has a sort of what I can only refer to as neurodivergent swag that bewitched me, body and soul. And I enjoyed how much of a tortured artist Adrian was. The jokes were funny, the plot was well-paced, and I really don't have anything negative to say. I think some of my enjoyment may have stemmed from the fact that this only halfway feels like a Reylo novel. No offense to the other books on this list. I can clearly see the influence of years of writing Reylo in the style and in Caroline and Adrian, but they also felt very fresh to me, both in the world of Reylo and in my broader experience with the world of romance novels. There's something I love about this book that I've had trouble pinning down, but I think it has something to do with power. This book felt very aware of the tropes around sex and escort work in movies like Pretty Woman, in which the female escort may, in the end, get to make the decision as to whether or not she wants to stay with the man, but in which she is often thoroughly derived of physical or financial power. She holds emotional power, but no material power. This gendered premise is reversed in Sweeten the Deal, but it's done so in ways that keep its characters on even footing. On the surface, a romance where the male lead is 10 years older than the female lead puts the power dynamic solidly in his favor, yet Caroline has the financial power and she functionally acts as the pursuant in their relationship. She initiates all of the changes to their dynamic. When it comes down to it, Adrian is the one in the traditionally feminine role, the one with the emotional power. He is the one who has to choose to return to the relationship, not Caroline, which is a subtle but effective subversion of genre tropes. I can, in good conscience, despite the surface-level ridiculousness of the premise, wholeheartedly recommend this book. I gave Sweet and the Deal 5 Star Destroyers. Knives, Seasoning, and a Dash of Love was originally published as Knives and Seasoning by Winona Wren on AO3, chapter by chapter, starting in December of 2020 and ending in October of 2021. Then it was published by independent publisher Lake Country Press in December of 2023, which I thought meant I wouldn't have to read it or talk about it, except then it was picked up by Random House Canada and republished in 2024, and I ended up with an ebook copy, and then I read it, and now we're here. Knives, Seasoning, and a Dash of Love follows Eden Monroe, a sous chef who lied on her resume, and Alexander Chen, an executive chef who is a real tight ass. Eden needs the money from the job to hire a private detective to find her family. The twist is that Eden once knew Alexander in culinary school when he went by his birth name, Shang, before he fell into a controlling apprenticeship with the restaurant owner and was forced to mask his own identity to be more palatable to the racist culinary world. Eden and Shang fall for each other. Shang learns how important it is to accept himself. Eden learns how to accept love and to stop chasing her absent parents. Yay! I actually found the characterization in this book to be excellent. I think Shang is a super interesting character, and while I can see the origins of his identity struggle in the Ben Solo Kylo Ren thing, I think he really takes on a life of his own in this book beyond the struggles of Kylo Ren. Unfortunately, the book fell flat for me in pretty much every other criteria, and I found the sex scenes in particular pretty challenging to get through. I gave Knives, Seasoning, and a Dash of Love 3 Star Destroyers overall. The final book I read for this book club from hell was Not Another Love Song by Julie Soto. This was actually the second book by Julie Soto I read for this video. Originally, I read her debut, Forget Me Not, which is not a true Reylo book, but which was definitely inspired by Reylo. Something Soto herself admits in interviews. However, then this came out and I decided it would make more sense to just talk about this one instead because it was actually a fan fiction. This story was originally published as The Food of Love to AO3 by author Loves Bitka 8, chapter by chapter starting in March of 2019 and finishing in December of 2019. Now, author Loves Bitka 8 had written for Reylo before, but she was far more notorious for her work in another fandom with an overlapping fan base, Hermione, the relationship between Draco Malfoy and Hermione Granger from the Harry Potter series. While her Reylo work was popular, she was a true big-name fan in the Hermione fan community, most notable for her Rights and Wrongs series, particularly The Auction, which the author has said will soon be pulled from AO3 and traditionally published. Not Another Love Song follows self-taught violinist Gwen, who's our Ray, and pop hit cellist Xander, who's our Ben, who's actually a classically trained violinist named Alexander. Gwen performs cello out of necessity at a wedding of one of his friends, which catches Xander's attention. Meanwhile, Gwen has been paying attention to him for the entire year in which they've been in the same pop orchestra, though Xander has never noticed her then. When she's awarded first chair, something he also secretly wants, the two clash, but then fall into each other's orbits, despite factors like his manager and his stepfather attempting to pull them apart. I struggled with the characters in this one. I think the loss of the implied Ray and Ben personas hit this book hard in the transition from fanfiction to original novel, because both Gwen and Alexander's characters felt hollow to me. Alexander has intermittent POV chapters, which helped, but most of his characterization is still how big he is. Gwen, meanwhile, has really unclear motivations throughout the book, which is hard for a book whose core conflict is her struggling to navigate others' expectations. I also felt like these two really had that insta-love thing romance authors often get flack for. I wasn't sold on their reasons for liking each other. That said, I did find the plot and pacing of this engaging, and I didn't at any point have a desire to stop reading it. I gave Not Another Love Song a classy 3.5 Star Destroyers. And that's it. Yay! That's all 13 of the traditionally published Reylo books. You might be thinking, why didn't you cover Insert Novel here? I saw a TikTok that said it was a Reylo book. A list of traditionally published books I saw mentioned online as Reylo books, but could find no legitimate proof that they were actually posted in some form as Reylo fanfiction include, but are not limited to, The Fake Mate by Lana Ferguson, Forget Me Not by Julie Soto, A Witch's Guide to Fake Dating a Demon by Sarah Hawley, Bear With Me Now by Katie Shepard, Love on the Brain by Allie Hazelwood, and probably the one you are going to leave in my comment section too. A list of books that did start their lives as Reylo fanfiction, but are published by independent publishers and thus not eligible for this list include, but are not limited to, The Rockstar's Omega by Hannah Hayes, It's Complicated by Camilla Isley, Black Moon Rising by Frankie Rose, For Love and Bylines by Maren Taylor, and Hanukkah at the Great Greenwich Ice Creamery by Sharon Ibbotson. This list also includes a whole lot of books published by Lake Country Press. Remember Omnific, the independent publisher that put out a whole host of Twilight fanfictions with the serial numbers scratched off as original dark romance novels? Because Lake Country Press is absolutely that, but for Reylos. At least 5 of their releases have been confirmed by the publisher as Reylo books, including the first edition of Knives, Seasoning, and a Dash of Love, which, as I already discussed, was later picked up for a second edition by Random House Canada. Their main specialties appear to be adult contemporary romances that are Reylo books, adult romantasy books that are probably not Reylo books, and books written by their founder, Brittany Wise Rock, who is a self-proclaimed hopeless Reylo. Honestly, I respect the grind. Publish the fanfiction you wish to see in the world or whatever. But all of this begs the question, why? Why did so many of these books get published? Why are they absolutely everywhere? I've explained in depth how we got to the point of publication, the rise of the Reylo fandom, how Twilight fanfiction made filing the serial numbers off of fanfiction socially acceptable, and the timeline of the publication of these books, but none of that quite tells us how 13 books about Rey and Kylo Ren from Star Wars made it onto bookstore shelves and bestseller lists, does it? So why do audiences eat these books up and ask for more? And how did these specific authors all get their fanfictions published? I have theories on the answers to both of these questions, so let's start with the reasons audiences liked these dang books so much. All the way back at the beginning of this essay, I talked about the anxiety some online communities felt that Reylo shippers condoned or encouraged abuse and why I disagreed with this take. But I do think that part of the reason the pairing was and is so popular and has accumulated such a large and tight-knit fan community is precisely because of the ambiguity present in the relationship between the two characters, because they started out as enemies, and because of the potential there. As I said earlier, I do not think by any stretch of the imagination that Reylo invented or even pioneered the enemies to lovers trope in the romance genre. In fact, I believe some historic academic analysis of the success of this trope might help shed some further light on the success of Reylo and the novels we've discussed here. To explore this, I turn to Dangerous Men and Adventurous Women, a 1992 series of essays written by popular female romance novelists of the day and edited by Jane Ann Krantz. Keep in mind that in 1992, romance novels looked a bit more like this than like this. Yet, I find that the topics explored in these essays are still incredibly relevant today. In particular, I want to discuss points from 2 different essays which focus on the appeal of the titular dangerous men and the potential of their relationship with romance heroines. There's one quote I want to open with from Mean, Moody, and Magnificent, the Hero in Romance Literature by Robin Donald that I feel fundamentally sums up the Reylo dynamic.
Every good romance heroine must have a hero who is worthy of her. And in most cases, he is a mean, moody, magnificent creature with a curling lip and mocking eyes and an arrogant air of self-assurance. Until he meets the heroine. She is the only person who can make him forget his natural courtesy, lose his rigidly controlled temper. When he is faced with her determination to do what she feels is right for her, He reacts in ways he knows to be despicable, or at the very least unworthy of his principles. The spirited, somewhat bewildered heroine senses that she is the only person who has such a powerful effect on him, just as he is the only man who can make her reassess the foundations on which she has built her life until then. She is able to read the small signals that tell her he is trustworthy, even though his hardness and antagonism may repel her at first.
Is this not Reylo in a nutshell? In Mad, Bad, and Dangerous to Know, the hero as challenge, Doreen Owens Malick basically breaks down the I can fix him trope. Malick cuts straight to the bone in her discussion of the inherent fantasy present in romances with these dynamics.
So what is the fantasy? Simply this: a strong, dominant, aggressive male brought to the point of surrender by a woman. Why does this particular fantasy hold so much appeal for us? Because it dramatizes, colorfully and dramatically, a battle of the sexes in which the woman always wins. Women are weaker physically, perennially behind in civil rights, always playing catch-up ball with men. This type of fiction offers a scenario in which a woman inevitably emerges victorious. The hero may swear and stomp and deny and resist and fight like hell and give the heroine a terrible time, my favorite type of story, in fact. But in the end, he capitulates because he simply must have her.
That is to say, while the male love interests in these books may be bigger, wealthier, stronger, and ruder than most of the protagonists, the female main characters in these books have all of the emotional power because the men fundamentally bend to their will. I would argue that this perhaps pertains most directly to the Hurricane Wars, the purest enemies to lovers novel in the entire lot, as well as the allure of canonical Reylo itself. I think books like Sweeten the Deal subvert this, and the rest of the books I've talked about do not pair their bends and rays in hand-to-hand or magic combat, and yet all but one put their bends in a position of power compared to their rays, whether they are her boss, her editor, or a wealthy vampire that controls her living situation. In Mean, Moody, and Magnificent, the hero in romance literature, Donald also gives us further insight into the archetypes which make up all of our assorted bends.
Heroes are men who admit to being difficult to live with, who demand extremely high standards in every aspect of their lives, who are natural, effortless leaders, strong men, men with prestige and intelligence whose faults are likely to be manifestations of strength and power. He is the master of his life. He is in control. Whether his sphere of influence is the boardroom or the mountains, the sea or the stage, the hero dominates it with his personality, his intelligence, and his quick, hard-honed grasp of every situation. A hero can seem arrogant and short-tempered, ruthless, tough, even cruel. He can be quite unlovable at first.
And so he is. But, of course, our rays always bring him around. Even in the novels, which do not contain any sort of physical fighting, the books still all present to us an incredibly powerful man, brought low, forced to suffer all sorts of indignity, simply because he cannot resist the heroine. He would do anything to have her, including, but not limited to, pretend to be her boyfriend, pay lots of money to see her naked, pay lots of money to employ her, lie to his boss to employ her, burn important professional bridges with someone for wronging her, quit his job to get her to improve her life, fly to the Arctic to keep an eye on her in case something goes wrong on her dangerous science mission, go on a shopping montage with her, go to Disney with her, let her sensually and platonically rub sunscreen into his back, and, of course, respect her autonomy by allowing her to walk away during the assorted, stupid third-act breakups, even though he loves her more than anything, more than he's ever loved anyone else, ever. The fact that these essays from over 30 years ago describe so accurately the rays and bend solos of these books works to prove that these stories are building heavily on an established literary tradition, and perhaps even introducing a new generation to a long-beloved set of archetypes. In their essay, Power Dynamics and Female Autonomy in Enemies to Lovers Novels, Julia Abbott puts The Love Hypothesis in conversation with Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte and Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. I find Pride and Prejudice especially ripe for comparison, given that lots of Reylo fans are also Pride and Prejudice fans. Christina Lauren, remember them from before, wrote in their blurb for The Love Hypothesis that the book has
a specific audience made of all the olives in the world who have deeply, ardently waited for this exact book.
This language invokes a famous quote from Pride and Prejudice.
You must allow me to tell you how ardently I admire and love you.
All of this is to say, then, that the Reylo dynamic is, in fact, a tale as old as time. But I don't think this is the only reason there are so many Reylo books on this list. So many books out in the world that started off as stories about these two characters. Because there's another fun little fact I found during my months of research for this project. Every single one of these books is connected. You're raising your eyebrows at me. You're thinking, well, of course they're connected. They all started off as fanfictions about the same two characters, but I'm here to tell you it goes deeper than that. And I can prove it. Here are all of the authors of the books I read and have discussed in this video. There are 10 in total. Ali Hazelwood, author of The Love Hypothesis, Jessica Clare, author of Go Hex Yourself, Ashley Poston, author of The Dead Romantics, Lana Ferguson, author of The Nanny, Kate Goldbeck, author of You Again, Jenna Levine, author of My Roommate is a Vampire, Thea Guanzon, author of The Hurricane Wars, Katie Shepard, author of Sweeten the Deal, Katrina Kwan, author of Knives Seasoning and a Dash of Love, Julie Soto, author of Not Another Love Song. Now, in order to get a book published by a major publisher, authors generally need literary agents to actually sell those books to the publisher. Of the authors on this list, 8 of them share a literary agent with one other author, while 2 of them have distinct literary agents. Ali Hazelwood and Thea Guanzon are both represented by Tao Li, who you may remember reached out to Hazelwood via Instagram DM. Li is thus a confirmed Reylo. Jessica Clare and Ashley Poston, the 2 authors on this list who never actually published their books as fan fiction, are both represented by Holly Root. Holly Root also represents another name in publishing that we've already talked about several times, Christina Lauren, authors of Beautiful Bastard, the book that started its life as Twilight fan fiction. Kate Goldbeck and Julie Soto are both represented by Gaia Banks. Lana Ferguson and Katie Shepard are both represented by Jessica Watterson, who also represents a number of authors who have been involved in Reylo fandom but whose books did not meet my criteria for this video, including Kirsten Bowling. Jenna Levine is represented by Kim Leonetti, and Katrina Kwan is represented by Jim McCarthy. I do not think either of these people are Reylo fans, so they are not going on here because I need all the space I can get. Then, in the publication process, comes the publisher and imprint. Most of these books, 9 out of 13 of them from 6 of the 10 authors, were put out by Berkley, the imprint of Penguin and Random House. However, I do not think this is sufficient grounds for a true connection, as Berkley is a massive publishing imprint in the romance game. That being said, I do think it is significant for 2 books to share an editor, as that means the same person directly worked on those books. Go Hex Yourself by Jessica Clare and My Roommate is a Vampire by Jenna Levine were both edited by Christine Swartz. Interestingly, though, the very first person Jenna Levine thanks in the acknowledgments to My Roommate is a Vampire is not her agent or her editor, but Cindy Huang, who is the editorial director at Berkley and the editor of Lana Ferguson's The Nanny and the editor of Katie Shepard's Sweeten the Deal. Of course, while we talk about people who helped get a book sold, we have to talk about blurbs. Blurbs are marketing copy written for upcoming books, often by other authors who have read an advanced review copy of the book prior to its release. Blurbs serve as endorsements, and blurb quotes can often be seen on the front, inside, and back covers of books. Specifically, blurbs by Ali Hazelwood, the most successful Reylo author we've discussed, can often be seen on the other books on this list. Go Hex Yourself by Jessica Clare, The Dead Romantics by Ashley Poston, You Again by Kate Goldbeck, Sweeten the Deal by Katie Shepard, and Not Another Love Song by Julie Soto all feature blurbs by Ali Hazelwood on their front covers. Not Another Love Song also features interior blurbs from, wait for it, Christina Lauren, as well as from Ashley Poston, author of The Dead Romantics. While we're at it, Ashley Poston of The Dead Romantics also wrote the cover blurb for Jenna Levine's My Roommate is a Vampire. Meanwhile, Ali Hazelwood's The Love Hypothesis features a cover blurb by Christina Lauren and an interior blurb from Jessica Clare, author of Go Hex Yourself. They're already connected because Hazelwood and Clare blurbed each other. Also, Kirsten Bowling, who is already on here for other reasons, wrote the cover blurb for Knives Seasoning and a Dash of Love by Katrina Kwan, which makes sense because they both received their debut Reylo to original novel publications from Lake Country Press. Now, I would be remiss to ignore the acknowledgements, in which plenty more of these authors talk about each other and several other people on this board. Allie Hazelwood thanks Cindy Huang, the editor. Thea Guanzin thanks Jenna Levine, Katie Shepard, and Allie Hazelwood, as well as Kirsten Bowling. Julie Soto thanks Jenna Levine, Thea Guanzin, and Kate Goldbeck, as well as Tao Li. Jenna Levine thanks Katie Shepard, who mentions Levine back by her fanfiction pseudonym in her own acknowledgments. But what about back in their fanfiction days? That's right, the internet is forever. As such, I know that back in the Reylo days, Julie Soto came up with a fanfiction title for Lana Ferguson, and Lana Ferguson beta-read a fanfiction by Julie Soto. Lana Ferguson also co-wrote 2 fanfictions with Katie Shepard. Katie Shepard wrote Gift Fic 4 and received Gift Fic from Allie Hazelwood, Jenna Levine, and Lana Ferguson. Allie Hazelwood wrote a Gift Fic 4 and received a Gift Fic from Lana Ferguson. Allie Hazelwood also received a Gift Fic from Jenna Levine. Do you get it? Do you see it now? Have you been listening? They all know each other, people. They sat on panels together and hung out in Discord servers together and edited each other's work and query letters, and they have been pulling these strings from behind the scenes this whole time, while the rest of us just sit here, making TikToks about it, writing X threads with so-called definitive lists of all the ways that Reylo has infiltrated bookstore shelves right under our noses, and we didn't even know the half of it. Nobody had any idea how deep it went, except the people who were making it happen, and I don't even know if they knew. Are you seeing this? Are you seeing this? Are you seeing this? Disclaimer, my very real legal counsel would like me to state definitively that I am not making any claims of corruption, nepotism, or Reylo shipping behavior of any persons involved in the publishing industry, particularly those at Berkeley, the imprint of Penguin Random House. Please, and I don't think I should have to say this, but I want to be so clear. Do not throw around accusations or be weird in the X thread replies, Instagram comments, email inboxes, or AO3 comments of any of the people whose names I have listed. Please just leave these people alone. They are doing their jobs, and I am doing my job, which I do not get paid for, which is to be hilarious. You now may return to your regularly scheduled video essay. Clearly, authors within any fan community are bound to influence each other. Perhaps these existing connections emboldened these authors to seek traditional publication for their work, or perhaps they helped each other, or perhaps it is a true coincidence. Regardless, I think it is fair to say that the Reylo community, despite occasional infighting, is a particularly unified and tight-knit community. I personally think some of this may have come from the idea that Reylo fans are in some way persecuted or at least disliked by other parts of the Star Wars community. This is one possible origin for the in-group term rats that Reylos use to identify themselves. Though this term has one connection to specifically being a fan of Adam Driver, who had a line about feeding the rats in a Law & Order episode once, there is also the connotation that Reylos were once called ratlos by those that found the ship and community unpalatable, annoying, or offensive. The Reylo community seems to have found joy in reclaiming this term, and many of the authors I've discussed also thank the rats in their acknowledgments. There is something to be said, then, about the power of online fan communities to inspire and push members to create. In an interview, published author and co-founder of AO3 Naomi Novik said something that really struck me.
And then I think, also, fanfiction is part of a community. Fanfiction is written not in a void. It's not just written for one single person speaking to an audience. It's written in a network. Frequently, stories communicate with one another. They communicate with what's in canon at that particular moment in time.
I see this in so many of the fan fictions I read as research for this project, as well as the sort of thing I just read for fun. You need look no further than the character archetypes of Rey and Ben, who appear over and over again in these stories. They're unified, they share traits, and yet these are not the versions of the characters from the screen. Instead, they're created collaboratively, through the shared world of fanon. There's also the element of gifting that I touched upon earlier. In their book, The Fan Fiction Reader, Folktales for the Digital Age, author Francesca Coppa explains,
"The fiction that is written in and for fandom is not only written to community specifications, it is also typically written as a gift. This means more than that the work is written outside the marketplace. Rather, it implies a whole social structure around gift giving and receiving. Fanfiction reading and writing tends to create social obligations. Many people write their first story to say thank you for all the stories they read previously, to give something back to the community that's fed them, narratively speaking."
This very noble idea of fanfiction as a sort of gift economy leads me to wonder then what is lost in the translation from freely produced and widely available labor of love to a commercially successful, traditionally published novel. We know what there is to gain: money, exposure to a wider audience, and the sort of acclaim that is impossible to achieve when writing under an AO3 pseudonym. There are no book signings or Q&As or even bestseller lists for nameless fanfiction authors. But one cannot deny that there is also something lost. I think some of the books on this list feel that loss more than others. There's something there, beyond the sometimes awkward transition in world building, though. It's a loss of context. Gone are the author's notes, which Lauren McInnes cites as a particularly important piece of paratext within the fanfiction, in their paper Filing the Serial Numbers Off, the Role of the Author in Fanfiction Published as Original Fiction.
"If you were to take a traditionally published novel and rip the cover and the first and last few pages off, the author as a personality would be almost entirely removed. You cannot do this in fanfiction because you would have to remove part of every single chapter. These notes vary in length and can be about anything from an update on the author's personal life, to sources for research the author has done, to responses to questions posed in the comments."
There is also, then, the role of serial publication in shaping the content of a fanfiction. By being published serially, fanfictions often exist in a state of flux until their completion, sometimes even beyond, as edits are sometimes made later down the line. This gives particular power to commenters in a way that does not have an equivalent in mainstream novel writing. If a commenter, someone who makes up the general audience, who has no need to be a friend of the author or something similar to see the chapters as they're being written, points out a plot hole or has a scene they really want to see included, there's nothing stopping the author from doing so in direct response to the feedback from that commenter. Authors often respond to comments and sometimes even build up rapport with specific commenters who comment on every chapter of the fanfiction as it comes out. These people are strangers to them, but this bakes in an author-commenter relationship to the text, especially as that author may be writing while thinking about what that commenter might enjoy. McInnes notes this as well in their paper.
"The paratext of an AO3 chapter can overwhelm the story itself, especially once a comment section builds up a lot of comments. Fandom creates an environment where community interaction rises to almost the same level of importance as the content of a fanfiction."
In opposition to writing fanfiction, novel writing is inherently a sort of lonely pursuit. Agents are generally uninterested in unfinished books, and authors become much more dependent on the people in their immediate personal network, or reliant on their own eyes for judgment and for editing. But also, if these stories weren't novels for major publishers, would I have read them at all? I don't think so, and I'm a fairly fandom-savvy person. Traditional publication brings these stories to entirely new audiences, the sort of moms in airports and book club members who certainly never would have found them otherwise. I don't think that it's a moral good or a moral ill to take a fanfiction and transform it into an original work, but I do think it is a transformation in more ways than just changing the characters' names from Rey and Ben. Oh, Ben Solo, we're really in it now.
That name died with my father.